For WorldatWork and WorkSpan TV, I'm Ryan Johnson. I'm joined in the studio today by Ravin Jesuthasan from Towers Watson. I want to welcome you.
Thanks, Ryan. Nice to be here.
And this is a special edition of our bookshelf series. And Ravin has a book forthcoming, I guess, in the fall of 2011. Your co-author is John Boudreau, who, of course, many WorldatWork members will remember. He was a prominent board member here for several years, and he's spoken at a number of our conferences. And the book is called Transformative HR. Ravin, I wonder if you could just tee up some of the premises of the book, and then we'll talk for a few minutes about maybe a couple of the case studies as well.
John and I have spent a fair bit of time working on this book. Our collaboration goes back a number of years. And over the course of John's research, as well as Towers Watson's research, we have come to understand the fundamental underpinnings of the next generation of talent management. And the book, Transformative HR, is about how organizations drive evidence-based change in their management of talent. Now, the whole evidence-based HR movement has been around for a couple of years and has its roots in evidence-based medicine. And we have, over the course of writing this book, drawn on some significant lessons learned through the evolution of that science. And what this book is about, Ryan, is about the what and how of driving evidence-based change. It's about the theory, the 5 principles that we view as being essential to the application of logic and decision science and methodology to the management of talent, with the goal of producing evidence. But it's more than just a theoretical book. It's also a book about how 10 great companies have actually brought these concepts to life in driving their value propositions and driving economic value for their organizations. The 5 principles that we talk about in the book, the first is this notion of logic-driven analytics. HR functions today are awash in metrics. They have more metrics than they can shake a stick at. We have more metrics today than we had 5 years ago. The problem is we have become increasingly metric-driven as opposed to strategy or logic-driven. And going through the process and discipline of understanding the business problems we're trying to solve, the underlying operating model, the requirements that are placed on the workforce, and using those as the basis for coming up with metrics to diagnose and measure is the right approach, as opposed to measuring and then trying to understand, if that nuance makes sense. Building on the notion of logic-driven analytics, something that is near and dear to both John and my heart is this notion of segmentation. We spend a fair bit of time in the book talking about how segmentation is one of those pivotal aspects of the New Deal. The issues of cost and risk are going to be with us for a long time to come. Few organizations can go out to attract, retain, and engage A players in all functions of their organization. That's going to require us to place some bets. Segmentation is about understanding from a demand perspective, i.e. the demands that the business model places on talent, which are the pivotal roles in the organization. Understanding how those roles contribute to the execution of strategy. But it's also from a supply side perspective, understanding the supply of talent in the marketplace. We are in a far less homogeneous marketplace now than we've ever been. We have issues of demographic differences, issues of immigration, issues of differences in skill sets, with social media significantly speeding up the flow of information. So our ability to understand the supply of talent in ways that we never have are pivotal to how we attract and source talent for the myriad of roles in our organizations. So segmentation is a key principle that builds on this fundamental notion of logic driving analytics. From an understanding of segmentation, we get to invest in programs that drive the optimal behaviors. And I think this is particularly relevant for the compensation practitioner, because as we look at how organizations integrate and create synergy across their programs, across the disciplines of HR, and between HR and other parts of the organization, what we find is this interesting Rubik's Cube, if you will, where progressive organizations have gone from great focus on functional or technical expertise and excellence to now coming to the decision that, you know what, an average performance management process, as an example, is perfectly acceptable if we've got world-class managers executing that process. And that's a trade-off that we're willing to make. So understanding that Rubik's Cube of how things like global grading and job evaluation link into succession management and workforce analytics that then link into driving engagement and retention of talent in pivotal roles. becomes a true science as opposed to an art form that in many cases it has been. So that would be integration and synergy, our third principle. The fourth one is one that I think is really compelling because it's an area that has come to the fore over the last 2 to 3 years, and it's this notion of risk. A client of mine recently said, if you think of the two functions in an organization that want to say no to any request, which ones are they? And the response was legal and HR. It's sort of said tongue-in-cheek, but it's also not to poke fun at HR, because HR has traditionally been the stewards of risk, if you will, in organizations, managing compliance, OSHA regulations, ensuring that non-discrimination issues are handled, etc. So it's not by happenstance that HR has had to play this role. But going forward, and particularly on the heels of some of the issues associated with incentive pay and the roles that HR and specifically compensation practitioners have played in helping organizations understand the risk of incentive compensation programs and their propensity to drive adverse or detrimental behavior that's detrimental to the interests of the organization. Some of the tools that have been applied, we're increasingly seeing progressive organizations like PNC Bank, who is one of the case studies in our book, actually spend some time looking at how they apply those tools and techniques to not just pay, but all aspects of HR, how they source talent, how performance is managed, how the investment in the workforce, the total rewards investment, is analyzed and managed with this mindset of risk. So shifting the mindset from one of risk mitigation and avoidance to one of risk leverage, understanding where we can place some bets because the risks are minimal or the potential impact on the organization is minimal versus where there may be a more significant or detrimental impact. The fifth principle is one of optimization. Many members of WorldatWork are familiar with the notion of total rewards optimization. We're seeing that mindset start to pervade all aspects of the HR investment and all aspects of the workforce. So thinking about leadership development. But behind that is a mindset of being willing to shift the investment from segments of one segment to another, from one program to another, from one business to another, and recognizing that we don't have a homogeneous workforce, and that if we are in fact to deliver evidence, these 5 principles really do need to be at the heart of our talent management processes.
You already, I think you jumped the gun on one of the questions I was going to ask, but I want to go back to it for a minute because it's a very compelling notion. The way you've just described this book sounds very, I mean, as you use the words, evidence-based, scientific, and what we've talked about a lot in this organization and the members talk about is how HR and compensation, total rewards, is a blending of art and science, and we sort of always fall back on that notion that it's a blending of art and science. So I just wanted to challenge you a little bit on that again, and I'd be interested to have your thoughts on, is the art going to completely disappear in your mind, or will there still be a place for art?
I think there will always be a place for art because the application of the science is very specific to the circumstances and unique needs of the organization. So I think of that as being an art form, if you will. So there is this decision science that underpins the decisions we make, but there is an art form of being able to distinguish the differences across different workforces, the specific nuances of an organization's culture, the specific needs of a leadership team, how they manage, and the trade-offs that need to be made on a day-to-day basis. So it's very much about the blending of art and science. But what we think we've done with this book, and what we actually, it's more a case of what we've seen these great organizations in the book do, is significantly advance the science behind evidence-based change. So you can, in fact, deliver the evidence, and it's based on rigor, logic, and facts, as opposed to rules of thumb and anecdotes, if you will.
I think it's a wonderful vision and incredibly optimistic for the HR professional who sometimes in their organization will be beat up for being too soft and squishy. So I really like the premise. I want to get into a couple or one or two of the case studies if we can. You mentioned PNC Bank. Is there another case study or two from the book that really stands out in your mind that you want to mention briefly?
I think there are a couple that are really compelling. One that is one that I have a fair bit of knowledge of is some of the great work that the Chicago Mercantile Exchange has done around segmenting the workforce and developing a talent strategy and a reward strategy that is highly segmented. This is an organization that in 2003 went public with a stock price of $70. realized a stock price of $700 in about 2008. So clearly an exceptionally successful organization, successful even as the financial crisis hit us, but literally stopped on a dime, and in spite of its success, recognized the conditions that had enabled that success were changing, i.e., they had built their business model with technology through reducing the cost of technology, recognized that there was an opportunity to transform that business model and further accelerate growth by building the products that would trade on their platforms, expanding their business model into Asia, engaging with other exchanges so that their platform could be leveraged. What they recognized early on, that this ambitious strategy required a set of skills that was, for the most part, not present in the organization, and it required a set of external skills. Those skills that buy strategy, if you will, required a very different deal from a talent management and a total rewards perspective. And so the organization very boldly segmented the workforce and articulated a highly differentiated deal for its various segments of the population. And that is, to me, a great example of HR leading the way with a strategy-driven organization and having the courage to take the organization through this change journey. And what was most compelling about it, Ryan, was how HR managed the change process, the transparency with which the deal was communicated, and how it managed the change of getting the different stakeholders aligned with the new deal.
The book is Transformative HR, coming out the fall of 2011 with your co-author, Dr. John Boudreau of USC. I want to thank you, Ravin, for coming in today and talking about Transformative HR. And for World at Work and WorkSpan TV, I'm Ryan Johnson.